go.
We will get the pre-show rocking and rolling. Crank up the music a little bit.
The VIP pre-show.
VIP. Break out the crystal, folks.
Still just water for you, though, right?
I might have a sip. I've been,
okay.
Back in the days when you could actually go out in public and congregate in places.
In the old times? Yeah.
In the old times, yeah. It's back in the old days. Turn my phone off. New Year's Eve parties and stuff. I'd always have, typically the bar would give you like a little sip of champagne essentially for toasting. Like
a little toast.
I would always, I would do my toast. So I'm not opposed to alcohol. I just don't require it in my life.
I know we talked about it a long time ago, I think up in Yosemite, and I just couldn't remember if you were like, I'd never had a sip, or you just didn't like it.
I've had alcohol. It's an acquired taste thing. And so my belief is if you have to acquire a taste for something, it really doesn't require the consumption of. So not a fan of alcohol, especially beer. Beers just taste nasty to me as far as I'm concerned. So if I were to drink alcohol, it'd be like a Jack and Coke, or it'd have to be probably some sweet foo-foo slushy drink.
Nothing wrong with that. That's what
peppermint schnapps. I've had some peppermint schnapps back in the day. Good stuff. And but like even coffee tastes nasty. I don't like anything mocha flavored. I'm not a big fan of tea. So I'm not a foodie or I'm not a taste person very much as some people. So it's not as important to me.
Cool. Fair enough.
Yeah. So I used to get in fights with my mom about alcohol. She'd yell, "Here, try this. It's Jack and Coke." I've had Jack and Coke. This is like at 16, 17, 18, whatever. And I'm like, I don't need to. It's like, no, you'll like it. And I go, I don't want to though. No. I'm like, Mother, it's okay. I don't have to drink just because you're from Wisconsin and everybody in Wisconsin drinks like a fish. It's okay. Don't need to.
Yeah. Drinking culture is interesting.
Yeah.
The way there's kind of like cultural bias towards doing it, and then also people who are engaging usually want other people to engage, which isn't unique,
especially with drinking.
Other things things operate that way too, but drinking like
sex
seems to be particularly I just mean when someone's doing something, they usually want other people to do it if they're enjoying it. Yeah,
sure. Yeah, but alcohol is definitely that way. I've had some relationships where they're like, I really wish you'd drink sometimes. I don't like drinking by myself. Well, sorry, don't know what to tell you on that one.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, interesting. I thought, interesting side note, in the last presidential election, both of the top candidates, I think they both claim, and it's probably true, that neither of them have ever had any alcohol.
I hadn't heard that one.
I didn't know that, but I guess it's true. My mom follows that stuff much more closely. Yeah, Donald Trump, his older brother was kind of, basically committed suicide by alcohol addiction. So he was never into it. And President Biden, I guess he had an uncle who was just a hardcore alcoholic or something of that nature, and he grew up watching that and just decided that he was never going to touch the stuff. Right. So neither of them were ever really partook ever.
Yeah, I had a good buddy back when we used to go dancing all the time who he didn't drink either. He used to back in the day, and he goes, in college he saw some stuff that just changed his mind. He goes, yeah, don't need it.
Yeah.
So, it's amazing how life events can influence us, especially from a young age.
Funny how that works. Yeah.
Very funny indeed.
Has that ever come up on this show before? I can't remember.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a great question.
Is that how it works? I've been trying to figure out how all this human thing works. Is that the key?
It's all the alcohol's fault. It's all the alcohol's fault, I tell you.
Yeah.
All righty. Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to the, let me find my button, the No Fucks Given podcast. I am your co-host, Ryan Perry, with my good buddy, Will McCoy. My hand is off the camera. Will McCoy. I did Will McCoy again. Mr. Cordonly.
Like
let me actually put the name up so I can read it. Sorry.
Maybe that's my alter ego that I haven't met yet.
It could be. Well, you'll have one next time you come up. I'll invite the other Will, and we can all get together. Fortunately, I've only done that once or twice with women, and it didn't go well. So,
that's right.
Be careful with the whole name thing.
Will McCoy's a real person. That's right. You told me that.
Will McCoy's an actual person that I know. Yeah. So
well, now he's like my shadow character or superhero or something. I'll figure it out.
The good thing is he's a good guy. He's like a really just down to earth good guy. Very, very likable guy. So it's considered a compliment.
I like it.
So and I think we've talked about this. Once I get something stuck in my brain, regardless of how unrelated it is, once it's stuck in the brain, it just gets stuck there for some reason. It's it can be a little frustrating sometimes.
You're just saving calories, making life easier.
Yeah.
What it's meant to do.
Just generalizing the shit out of everything, man.
It's been known to happen, maybe for every human being on the planet who's ever existed and exists right now.
Yeah. Totally unrelated before we jump into the show, which is why it's so hard to have what you want. I was watching, I think it was Vice on YouTube this morning. And apparently Greece is up in flames, like just so they're dealing with some of this fire catastrophe stuff that we're dealing with also. Because I know a lot of people kind of tend to pinpoint, go, oh, California, it's always burning. There are other parts of the world. Yes, there are other parts of the world that suffer in the same ways that we do. So it's not just you folks, it's universal.
The transformation of fire.
Yeah.
And the horrors of it.
Yeah.
I may know something about that being evacuated last fire season. Yeah. You too as well.
Yeah, were you evacuated? I haven't been evacuated. Fortunately, I've always been in the outskirts pockets. But yeah, 2017 fire, I could actually see from my house I was up on a hill at the time, but it was on the opposite side of the county. So I had some friends who were evacuated that came and stayed with me for a short period of time.
Was 2017 the really, really bad Santa Rosa fire?
Yeah, that was the one that went through Coffee.
Yeah.
Coffee Park. Yeah.
Wow, you weren't affected by that. That's wild.
No. Fortunately,
I mean, of course you were affected, but you weren't. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't directly affected. So, but anyway, some things don't just happen to us. They are universal, such as why it's so hard to have what you want. And it's not necessarily, and it could go both ways in the sense of it's something that I would like to have that I don't have, or it's something that I would like to have be different than what I'm currently having. I don't want what I'm currently having. I would like something different. And somehow both those, maybe that we're trying to move towards something, or we're trying to move away from us, try and move away from something. They have a way of sticking. Just try and stick.
And it has a way of being epically, frustrating, colossally, maybe universally sized frustration and anger about that. But it's just our systems doing their jobs perfectly, actually, which is a complex topic and sometimes hard to swallow when you're really angry. I know it still bothers me, even though I kind of understand how it goes. And it reminds me of a quote from art trainer Carl Buchheit, and it kind of will unpack this a bit, but he says, we are biased to reach for something better, but we are wired to stick with what we've got. And I think that sums it up. There's so much to that, but that kind of sums it up really well. And I'd say we're biased we have an innate inbound need, as far as I can tell and feel, to actualize ourselves, to self-express and reach the highest expressions of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, I wouldn't say culturally or kind of species-wise we foster that very well at this point, but I think at a cellular level, we all feel the need to progress and to actualize ourselves. And yet our minds are built to learn and build in learning that's useful and keeps us alive. So we're wired to stick with what we got because it's proven to be survivable. So those parts of us that keep us alive, which we've talked about a lot on this show, but if you're just tuning in, those parts have primacy in our minds because they're the oldest, most ancient parts of us and our nervous system. And some would argue maybe the most important because they keep us from not perishing.
Right. Man,
but when we just want to have a better experience of ourselves in life, that can be really frustrating.
Yeah, definitely. And to kind of simplify it a little bit is there's kind of two programs running, if you will. There's the conscious mind that says, I would like better. I keep on doing this mantra, I deserve better, I have money, I am happy, I am whatever. So we have these mantras. And yet, even after saying the mantras for a month, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, could go on indefinitely in some cases, depending on how stuck the system is, we're still not getting what it is that we want. So the conscious side says, I want this, and yet the pain and misery, if you will, still follows us. And that is the other aspect. We're all wired to stick. So that's the wiring part that you were kind of talking about, that primal part of the brain that we don't communicate with on a regular basis. We're not taught to communicate or understand the primal part of the brain. We just listen to the prefrontal cortex that says, I want this, I want to be happy, I want money, I want success, I want relationship. However, I would say over 99% of the time when you ask people, oh, well, how much money? I don't know, just enough to be happy. Oh, okay. Well, how much is going to make you happy? I don't know. All right, well, let's define what'll make you happy. What'll make you happy? More money. Okay, well, how much money? It's like we really don't know.
When you're happy?
Yeah, we really don't know because there's this other part of the brain that we don't communicate with, and there's a reason know how to.
Yeah, as I said, there's a reason we don't communicate with it, and it's because we weren't taught, and because it doesn't have language. It that critter part of our mind doesn't do language. It doesn't do a whole lot of meaning. It just kind of does a heartbeat, respiration, blood flow, things like that. Yeah. Alive or dead, binary calculations. And it's really the perfect kind of QA, quality assurance, risk management kind of person, because if there's even a sliver of doubt, it biases towards, all right, we need to not do this, because it could mean it could not be survivable, so let's stick with what is proven to be survivable. And if you come from a place that's really harsh or emotionally or physically violent or emotionally invalidating, or some type of environment that was less than optimal, which can mean so many things, what's proven survivable is an experience that's less than optimal, but our mind continues to generate it to keep us alive.
Yeah, and that environment is essentially safe. As far as that primal, the unconscious, the critter brain that we like to call, to the critter brain, it has learned how to survive that environment. Therefore, there's actual comfort and safety in that environment, which is why it reaches out and identifies those sources, and that's why you attract those sources in your life. Is because it's trying to keep you alive. It wants you to be safe. It's really in your best interest, folks.
And an interesting thing about trauma, and trauma can mean anything from, just being stopped from crossing the street as a kid because a car was coming towards you, and that was traumatic because when you're a kid, things are heightened and a bit sensitive, or anywhere to the most horrible kind of trauma you can think of. We'll leave it at that. When you have trauma and it's big enough or systemic and sustained over a long enough time, our brains start to deaden our senses. It powers down our aliveness. It powers down our sense of our ability and our capacity to have enjoyment and to imagine better futures and to be creative and to enjoy our sensuality, and all these other sensual inputs get deadened a bit. So sometimes a lot of people with more serious or more chronic trauma, the brain actually recreates the traumatic experiences because it's one way to feel alive. It has to be in this heightened sense of danger to actually feel anything. Although it's not actually calculated as danger, which it should be, which is another topic. But so
kind of
based on how we've molded this clay inside of our head, things can get really wonky sometimes. And that's hard to wrap our heads around.
The adrenaline junkie kind of comes to mind as far as what you were talking about, that deadened sense, where if you're not living on the edge, then how do you know you're alive, type of a deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's one extreme example of it. Putting the what's that movie, Hurt Locker, or the bomb diffuser. He can't.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
It's an older movie, but
I know the name, but I don't know the premise.
It's a bomb diffuser in Afghanistan, and he comes back from tour, and has so much PTSD and so traumatized that normal life is absolutely unbearable for his system. And he goes back and re-enlists and gets back into the field. And, there's some belonging and some meaning around, being back in the army and serving again, but it's also more just like not being under threat is calculated as threatening and unbearable.
Right.
And that's an extreme example, but that happens in people's lives who aren't in war zones. Sure. That's just an easy way to illustrate it.
Yeah. It's a great illustration. It makes me think of World War II. And how many people came back, GIs from World War II, and were like, I got to get me a motorcycle. Those Jeep things are pretty cool. Let me go get a Jeep and see if I can go crawl out in the country and do stuff that I don't think is possible. Those people were coming back looking for excitement because they had experienced it. But I would also imagine that if you're, and this is a little off topic, but if you're at a place where you are truly surviving something, you could potentially be killed. I'm going to send you up in a bomber, and the Allied, not the Axis forces, are going to throw up all kinds of artillery and flak, and we're going to have airplanes come in and shoot at you. And, you come back and there's 50 holes in the airplane, and one of the engines is smoking and barely spinning. And I would imagine it would kind of create a new heightened sense of what it means to be alive.
Absolutely. I would imagine so too. And as I said, when you get in that situation, your mind, there's different ways trauma affects us. So there's like developmental trauma, which is small traumas, small to medium traumas that happen chronically and consistently over years in childhood. And that causes PTSD in its own way. And then there's all big T trauma, right? The stuff we think of, a horrific car crash, being molested, being raped, being in a war zone, those type of like things. When you think of trauma, usually people think of really big traumatic things, which isn't necessarily accurate, but is totally included. When you go through those bigger T traumas and you survive them, and if your brain starts seeking them out a bit for the reasons we talked about so far, the meaning is kind of warped. That's one of the
Right.
trauma symptoms. It's not actually calculated as threatening, even though it's extremely threatening,
Right.
because it just feels more normal. It feels good, you know, as a general way of stating it. It feels okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though it's incredibly dangerous.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we have thresholds for everything. So my threshold for danger versus a stuntman's threshold for danger versus somebody who's like, I want to be a Green Beret. I've got a cousin who I think he was an Army Ranger and a Green Beret. He did multiple tours. He did some private work, and you know, one of those guys. He's like, I can't tell you what I did.
Yeah.
And so, and now he's living in a little town in a little state. And I'm like, how did you make that transition from jumping out of airplanes and teaching people how to kill to essentially running a laundromat in a small state, in a small little town in a small state? It's like, that's just got to be huge. But I would imagine at some point, maybe sometime, it's kind of like the old mafia movies. You know, the guy gets old enough. He's like, hey, Joey, come on. We got to have a talk. You're old. I'm old. I just want to enjoy the grandkids, you know, have my little Bacardi and Coke. Do we have to fight anymore? Come on. Let's take it easy. You know, I don't have the goosebumps. What's the word I want that you used to have, you know, the oomph.
I don't know.
But yeah, I would imagine it's got to get tiring at some point, and that breaks another threshold. I mean, because the brain essentially works on thresholds. We have thresholds for everything. We have upper thresholds, we have lower thresholds, and we've heard, you know, rock bottom is a wonderful threshold. It's painful, but it's a great motivator, because it finally says enough is enough. And when you want to have what it is that you want in life, typically we're so well taken care of. It's, you know, if we got money for the heater, we're able to put food in our belly, we have a vehicle that we can drive, and maybe we've got a couple of friends we can hang out with. The brain, for the most part, says, look, your life is pretty damn good. Don't rock the boat and continue on. You know, we haven't
which is interesting.
Threshold.
Yeah. Part of our brain says that, and part of our brain, a lot of the time unconsciously, but maybe not, says, again, I don't even know if it's part of our, you know, neocortex, front of our mind kind of thing. It might, we're impelled, we're like driven to actualize, to move forward in our lives. That doesn't mean, you know, a lot of people don't answer the call, and that leads to a lot of problematic things if you don't take updates in your life, and if you don't, you continue going through experiences and don't learn from them. That tends to lead to detrimental things, you know, ill health and other stuff in your life over time. But where was I going with that? I lost my train of thought. But yes, so part of us wants to stay here because we're wired to stay here, and part of us wants to move forward. And I like that word and the frame, self-actualization. I think it's a really accurate way to look at how humans do things, right? And another really accurate way is the other side of the coin. We're wired to stay the same, and we're kind of compelled to move forward from a force that's almost beyond us. But it is us. So it's a really tricky situation sometimes.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, because you mentioned your friend, two things come to mind about that. One, some people go through wartime activities and all that stuff and don't actually develop PTSD and don't get traumatized to the point where it becomes imprinted in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies. You know, that doesn't necessarily mean it has to happen that way. I forget who it was. I don't know if it was the VA or some huge study came out a long time ago when I was in high school, I think, and I was like, well, this is total bullshit. But they said something to the effect of like 60% of soldiers who have wartime PTSD joined the military with PTSD already.
Mm-hmm.
And me not knowing anything, I'm like, well, that sounds like horseshit. These people are just covering their asses and yada yada yada.
Right.
But now I think it's probably much higher than 60%, I would imagine. Because if you grew up in an experience as a child that felt like you grew up in a war zone, and that's probably more of an emotional war zone than an actual one, but could be an actual one, the brain will seek out, metaphorically and actually the experience of life is war. And the fact that humans have been at war since the beginning of time and still to this day kind of points to the fact that this is inside of us.
Right.
The nature nurture argument about it is interesting.
From a very early age, it's inside of us.
Yeah.
And it also,
I almost feel like being born almost seems like a traumatic, like warrior kind of experience. If you think about it, right? You're just hanging out like in the perfect temperature, getting fed, not having
nice
to do anything.
And
yeah. And then all of a sudden you're violently pushed out into this harsh environment that you have to figure out. Yeah. Although if mom's under stress or if mom's really distorted and kind of dangerous herself, being a fetus is not such a great experience either. But we can talk about that another time.
Yeah. Let's not talk about the fetus today. So as far as kind of like breaking it down into a tangible, understandable way, as far as, because first of all, you have to identify. If you don't identify what's going on, it's really hard to be able to make change. So to be able to say that, okay, you've identified, as an example, I'm not happy, I want to have a different experience. So first step is, okay, great, you've identified that you're not happy. Typically identifying what you don't want is the easy part. It's much easier to identify things that we don't like. And then, so the next step, and typically one of the really important steps in moving forward, is identifying what it is that you do want. And it doesn't have to be super specific, although the more specific can be helpful, but having an idea of, I want to start heading in this direction because this way just hasn't been serving me very well, I think is very helpful. And then we kind of mentioned earlier that we've got two conversations going on in the brain. There's the conscious conversation. I'm not happy. I want something else. I don't necessarily know what that something else is. I just know it's not this, but it looks something like this. And for those people that are a little bit more clear, they're like, that is what I want. However, every time I start moving towards that, I don't feel something changes and it doesn't feel good. I don't want to put the effort in. I don't want to wake up early. I don't want to, whatever it is, it doesn't feel good anymore to move towards what I want. And that's the other system that's going on in the brain, the unconscious mind, the critter brain. And you really have to learn to identify those feelings and then having a conversation with them, which is kind of like talking to a dog. If you haven't been trained to understand how a dog communicates, you as a human are going to have a really hard time communicating with that animal. When you get trained to learn how the unconscious mind works, the subconscious, the critter brain, I'm going to kind of clump that all in together. I know that technically that's not correct. When you start to understand how the brain works, then you can start learning to identify what that means and the changes that you can make. And part of that is, I think mantras can be beneficial, but we have to go a little bit deeper than just stating, I want to be happy, as an example.
Yeah, but I guess if you were even going to go that route, which I don't want to make too wrong, but I don't ever really recommend, you would say I am happy instead of I want to be happy.
Correct.
If that's what you were going to repeat every day, you may make it present. But I guess there's a way you can, so we can unpack what you just said, super useful, and we can unpack it a bit. When you approach your mind dimensionally, right, you have your conscious thinking mind, let's call that the senior consciousness. And as we talk a lot about on this show, making choices is probably the most important life skill, meta skill, whatever you want to call it, skill of
Right.
enjoying your life and being human that you can develop. So just start building, lifting that weight, building that
Right.
muscle of making choices, even if it's like, I choose to have a glass of water, and then you have a glass of water. Success. All right.
Right.
The unconscious and subconscious parts of your mind don't know the difference between a huge goal and a little goal. So
Right.
doing that really can be really, really useful, even though it sounds almost laughable and kind of stupid. Choosing to do something, doing it, and celebrating the success and accomplishment of it, that's super important.
Right.
And it might take some time to actually add up, in the same way that you're not going to be buff overnight, or you're not going to be fit and healthy overnight. You're going to go to the gym for 6 months, a year, 5 years, and you're going to see results from that. And then if you're going to repeat some mantras or something, we can take a top down or bottom up approach to this. Top down meaning kind of cognitive mental thing, and then bottom up meaning like a body based approach to stuff, which can be really useful too, especially for trauma. Because as we mentioned, the critter brain doesn't do language, and it doesn't do time. It doesn't do a whole lot of things. It's very niche and very specific around survival. So if you're going to say, I am happy, and your conscious mind's like, bullshit, like, it just clashes with your identity, and it makes your identity not coherent, right? You're like, well, I know I'm not happy, but I'm saying I'm happy. And if that disconnect creates some anxiety or some discord, or like a lack of safety in the body, there's ways that you can work to calm your body down somatically that actually might have a bit of an effect. Although I think there's more powerful, more generative ways to go about this.
All right. And one of those simple ways is to reset the system by just a deep belly breath. If you start feeling a little anxious or a little whatever that is, that nervousness or whatever, really deep belly breaths. Is it the nervous system that we're resetting? I know we learned about it, but I don't remember the technical part of it. But it has to be a belly breath, not a chest breath.
Yeah, it causes, or what we're after is causing like a parasympathetic reset, like working with the nervous system and the vagus nerve specifically. And so taking some deep belly breaths is one of many ways to do it. And, any sort of good mindfulness tool is kind of what we're after in this sort of somatic thing, where you get intensely present to the moment. And then your body and your mind, and you can even notice yourself like, oh, if I'm feeling anxious, part of me feels unsafe. So when you get really intense in the moment, you can't help but notice. And a cool way of doing this that I've found and learned is like taking an object and just like really experiencing it, like really being present to this pen and like experiencing it in your senses. And then you can remind yourself, or at some point, if you're just totally present and mindful, your body notices that it's safe right now.
Right.
Even though these thoughts have triggered some stored anxiety in the body, or or these thoughts have triggered some thoughts of the future that are unsafe. We're safe right now. So then it calms down our threat response a bit. And that's a muscle that needs to be built too. That might not be transformational the first time, but over time that will pay huge dividends.
All right. Yeah. And you kind of touched on something as far as what the mind is perceiving, or what it's, this is going to happen, so I'm going to start getting anxious, or because of events that happened in the past, is also one of the ways that the mind works is that because the critter brain does not recognize time, all of that is happening now in your system. And so sometimes I think people get a little frustrated with themselves, and they get like, oh, well, why, I don't know why I'm getting anxious, or I don't know why I'm getting frustrated, or I don't know why I'm feeling this, because I know I'm safe. It's because the mind, which is the part of the mind that's designed to protect you and make sure that you're safe, the part that doesn't care if you're happy or sad, hot or cold or hungry or not, it probably cares a little bit if you're hungry because that's tied to safety. But it is experiencing this now, therefore you're feeling this now. And I think it's really important for people to understand that, okay, all the experiences that you have happen for a reason. If you try and logically figure out what that reasoning is, it's not going to happen there because it's happening so deep inside your system. And but realize that it is your system is its intent is to protect you, and the way the system protects you is it makes what it feels positive things that are going to keep you alive. It makes them feel positive, good, and things that are a threat, things that are going to affect your survivability are going to feel bad, and it's going to amp that negative feeling up. So if you ever have an experience where you're feeling like just, oh my gosh, and literally for some people, they go, it feels like I'm going to be annihilated. And they could be sitting in a room and in complete safety. And because of whatever it is that's going on, the pictures and the sounds that are being made in the unconscious mind, that is what's triggering the feeling. And ultimately, that's what you, as an individual, if you want to move towards the things that you want in life, we have to identify the pictures that the mind is making that is preventing you from moving towards that. Because the closer you get to something that the mind doesn't think is safe, even though you consciously want that and you consciously know it's safe and you consciously know it's a good thing, but if it's going to affect your core belonging, if it's going to affect any beliefs that the system has made about your survivability in that experience, it's going to bring up all this traumatic experience to let you know that, hey, this is bad, stay away. And there's a disconnect there. And I think it's that disconnect that people get really frustrated with because they don't understand what's going on.
Totally. And man, you really hit the nail on the head. Like that was really, ka-chunk. That's really beautiful because we're not taught this. And it's like, this is so fundamental. It's like, we should learn this in school before anything almost. We don't understand how this works. And we don't understand that this is like the sweet and sour of life, like the joy and the pain of it, that they kind of, both sides of the coin kind of come together. And it just hit me one day that it's almost like in the painful experiences we go through, it's like life is actually dropping the breadcrumbs to what we want. Somewhere in the recesses of our mind, if it's not conscious, we know what our next step is. We know what we truly want. We may not be able to access it consciously, but it is in there. It's never not there. It's always there. And this is why choosing what we want, making choices consciously, little and big life choices, is so important. Because as you said, Ryan, when you get clear about what you want and you start moving towards it, everything that's in the way comes up.
Right.
And that feels so painful and so frustrating. And it is, right? Like, God, it sucks ass, like for real. Right. But like, those are the opportunities, like those are clearing those barriers is the path to a better experience of ourselves and a better experience of our lives and getting what we want. So it's like when we choose what we want and we get closer to it, the stuff in the way bubbles up. And there's so many ways and so many people out there who can help you like revise and clear these things that are in the way. And when they're truly gone, they're gone forever, right? Sometimes we change stuff and it comes back. It's like, all right, there's more for me to revisit here. We've all had that experience. Sometimes we have really deep patterning that might run our entire lives. We just kind of knock the emotional wattage down on it and it gets better and better.
Right.
But this is like moving towards what we want, towards our actualization, towards our enjoyment, towards the things that we consciously want. Like it it shakes everything up, and then the stuff in the way that needs to be revised reveals itself out of the unconscious, and that's an
Right.
incredible opportunity for us.
Right.
It's
And
a real gift, even though
yeah,
it's incredibly painful, and you're just like, fuck this, like, not again.
right. Because we don't want to, and it's, I don't know how much of it's Western society versus just human behavior, where we kind of run away from the pain. We don't want to deal with the pain, so let's move away from the pain.
Yeah,
And yet,
take a
like
pill.
like you've so well said, it's like that pain, that is the body letting you know that, hey, this is what needs to be addressed. And
Mhm.
then, because the way we're taught, oh, well, I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel mad. I don't want to be depressed. So I don't want to deal with this. Let's go that way instead.
Mhm.
And then we're like,
Yeah.
well, shit, I'm not getting what I want. Why am I not getting what I want? And then we get mad and we get sad and we get depressed. And I'm generalizing here, but it's
Mhm.
literally, I'm trying to figure out how to visualize it. But if you kind of, what you want, if you're heading towards what you want and you bump up against something, may it be an
Mhm.
identity, a belief, a limiting belief. What's one? The common one is the, where you, oh, I can't really be that person. I'm faking it. What's that called? The
Like imposter syndrome.
imposter syndrome. Thank you. That's kind of a
Mhm.
common one. Even you talk to people who've become huge stars, they
Yeah.
suffer from imposter syndrome all the time, and they got to kind of go out there and make it, because they're like, really, I can't imagine so many people love me, or so many people think that I have this knowledge. I remember listening to John Asseroff. He was coming out with a new book
Mhm.
where he got really deep into the neuroscience of the way the brain works. And he goes, as I'm writing this book, he goes, I felt confident in my knowledge, but now I'm kind of presenting it as an expert. And so he was bumping into that. He's like, are people going to feel that I'm credible? I got to make sure. He was getting kind of anxious. He's like, I got to make sure I got my dot my I's, cross my T's, my information's correct, because
Mhm.
people are going to think I don't have a PhD. I'm not some mad scientist or anything like that, like some of these great people that he's learning from, but he had the
Yeah.
knowledge. And yet, even somebody as accomplished as him is dealing with this imposter syndrome. What he understood, though, is that every time as he's moving towards what he wants, when he hit that negative feeling, he knew not to run away from it. He
Yeah.
understood that there was something in the system that was trying to keep him safe. So instead of running away from it, he leaned into it. And, he's got
Did
tools
he
and
say how he
expertise.
did that?
Um, he did
Because there's
not.
so many ways.
There's
Okay.
so many different ways. Yeah, unfortunately, he was
Yeah.
taught he was late teens when he got involved with a gentleman who really taught him the importance of mindset and different things. But as
Mhm.
you're moving towards what you want and you bump into that, whatever it is, you got to lean into it to identify, okay, what is this? What is the unconscious mind, the part of my mind that I really, unless you're been doing this for a while, have probably never talked to before. That's why I use the
Mhm.
analogy of trying to train a dog or talk to a dog. If you've never done it before and it works in a completely different way, it can be really difficult. But you got to lean into that and kind of go, wow, where are those feelings coming from? And if you
Mhm.
have the ability, it's like, well, what is the earliest memory that I have that comes from this feeling?
Yeah.
And a lot of times weird shit will bubble up that you have no idea. Like, oh, wow, in the sixth grade, I was dun dun dun. And I was talking to my dad and blah, blah, blah happened. And you're like, how did, where did that thought come from? Totally
Yeah.
wasn't part of my conscious mind ever. And then all of a sudden it just bubbles up. It's because you're leaning into this, and there was a learning experience back in the sixth grade that your unconscious, the critter mind, made note of and said, hey, this was a learning experience. In order to survive, we're not going to do this again, or we need to stay away from this, or whatever that is. However,
or the meeting that was made was painful enough to avoid and kick up fight or flight.
Right. Made an imprint essentially in the mind that said, it created a marker in the mind that said, hey, pay attention to this. It's important. But it does this on a subconscious, unconscious level. So all these decisions are going on without us consciously being aware of it. And when we bump up into them, and because we don't communicate with them and we don't know where they come from, we tend to run away from them versus leaning into it and identifying, okay, because what the mind made up when you're in the 6th grade or when you were 3 years old is completely different than when you're 25, 30, 40, 50, 60. And
especially if it generalizes.
And it's really not useful most of the time today as an adult, what you learned as a 2-year-old and what a 2-year-old was able to, what you're saying, generalize out of this situation. It's just not helpful or relevant for where you're at today.
Yeah. Well, there's so many ways it can happen, but just to work with an example, if mom's threatening or unstable, or dad or both, a little 2-year-old or a little 4-year-old might have a belief. It's like, people aren't safe. People are dangerous. Being seen or noticed is dangerous. These kind of really sweeping, overarching, generalized experiences that make sense for a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And as I said, these core beliefs that get really problematic are usually stated very simply in like childlike language at their roots. And then when you grow up and the world is dangerous, man, the ramifications of a belief and an identity that stabilizes that and seeks to confirm it as true, because this is the other part of what we talk about today. Like, our identity needs to be coherent. What we believe about ourselves and about the world, even if it's incredibly painful and just awful, parts of us that are deeper than our conscious mind seek to confirm that, to make that true, or else we're crazy. And that's even more painful than the painful experiences. The idea that we can't navigate reality and we're a little crazy, that's worse to our brains than the painful things that we might be recreating unconsciously.
It's an interesting place. I was watching a video of changing of the guard at is it the Unknown Soldier in DC? I believe it's the Unknown Soldier. So they have the changing of the guard, and
got it. I don't know.
And it's so well done, and the timing and the professionalism. It's one of and I don't know if it's the Marines that monitor it, but you have one guy that just walks the line. He walks back and forth, and he, has got his gun, and he doesn't move. Well, I mean, he moves, but he's kind of like a robot, and everything is very chunk, chunk, chunk. And when you change the guard, they have this whole process where a new guard comes in, and then you've got another gentleman who's like a commanding officer who's checking the other guard, making sure he's clean, his gun's been maintained. Then he's checking the new guy, and then they go through the change and all of this. And it's amazing at the precision, the professionalism that they do for this tomb. That is, gosh, I wish I had more information. I love when I bring up things, and it's the unmanned. It's
I'm like, I definitely knew and just can't recall the name at this point, but I know it's like all the kind of the
Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers in Fort Myers. So
like honoring all the nameless soldiers who have died.
Yeah, it's a monument dedicated to the deceased U.S. service members whose remains have not been identified. And so they have the guards go back and forth protecting it, and it just dawned on me the amount of discipline that the guards would have to go through and this is something I'm assuming they volunteer for, because it's phenomenal the amount of discipline that it would take to do that, and how much respect and just really caring is what it came out to be. And I had this kind of this emotional thought. I was like, wow, to imagine people care enough to volunteer, because I imagine it can't be the most enjoyable thing. It's not like the security guard sitting in an AC controlled environment, you know, sitting in a lounge chair watching a bunch of CRT screens with video cameras on it. You know, this guy is in full uniform. He's outside. Doesn't matter if it's raining, if it's hot, if it's cold. He's walking with precision and dignity. And I'm like, how much does somebody have to care in order to volunteer for that? And it kind of was
the
like,
meaning around it's very strong.
Yeah, for that individual, that they actually, and I was like, wow, I had this realization for kind of my threshold as far as how much do people really care. And I know my threshold, or I shouldn't say threshold, maybe it's more of a distortion of reality, is that people don't care as much as they really do. And that's all based on my childhood growing up and what I learned and what I believed and all of those type of things. But kind of what we were talking about earlier, that when you have these moments that are a little emotional, where it feels, maybe you feel a little sad. In my case, I got really sad, and I was like, wow, why am I getting sad watching this transition of soldiers from one to the other? And so instead of running away from it and going, well, that's silly, I leaned into it. And the word that came up was caring. And so there was a learning for that came from me just a couple of days ago, where I'm like, wow, people really do care a lot more than what I think I give the human experience credit for. And so then it's like, okay, well, if I've calibrated caring to be so low, how much do I care? And how much do I show that I care to others? And if I'm showing up this much, as an example, then what is the impetus on the other person to care about me? So it's kind of, you know, creating reality that to justify a belief, or a belief creating, you know, that's that circle of life, belief in reality. It's like, oh shit, okay, so maybe is it that I've had this diminished feeling of caring, that, oh, people really don't care that much. You just got to get through life, do what you got to do. And so because of that, I put out a small amount, and therefore in return, I get a smaller amount. I'm like, holy shit, what if people really do care a lot more? And if I expanded my ability to care more, would then people care more about me? And it's not even that people would care more about me, but my perception of how much people care about me would improve. And I was like, ooh, that's kind of a dangerous proposition. I don't know if my system could handle that.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't know if I could handle people caring more about me. That doesn't sound comfortable. And so it's those little insights, when you lean into the pain, that will give you kind of this a little bit more of an understanding of what your system is, how your system is seeing the world, and how it's trying to protect you. And it's like, oh, so it would be dangerous if people cared more about me, or my perception of them caring more about me. So I'm like, well, shit, now I got to find ways to have people show that they care more about me, in order to work with that.
Yeah.
You know, because I need to survive that experience to be okay with it.
Yeah. And then putting some attention on what might it mean about you, or about other people, or about the world, when when you can notice that people care about you more now, that kind of, you know, where is the lack of coherence in how the mind perceives reality and believes about ourselves.
Right.
And it's tricky business, because this is the other kind of frustrating thing that happens a lot of the time to people is when we're moving towards something that we want, that we really valued, but is pretty unsafe in our minds and our bodies because of past trauma and past learning. Sometimes we'll get good positive hits, and the positivity will be too much too soon, and then it's followed by a lot of bad feelings because of that. And that makes this stuff really tricky, having to just navigate the waves of these things. So sometimes you want to take it little chunk by little chunk, slightly more positive, slightly more positive.
And I would recommend that people do that in order to kind of calibrate what is acceptable. And then also understand that part of the system of making sure that you stay safe is also checking back on past behavior. So it's very normal for the system as you're moving towards, as you're having success moving towards what it is that you want, that every now and then you're going to get to a point where it's going to plateau maybe a little bit, and it's going to go, let's go back and check that old behavior as a comparison to the new behavior. And are we really heading in the right direction? And so I think sometimes people get a little frustrated with that because they're like, well, I was doing so good and then I fell behind. And then you can get into this emotional spiral downwards where you feel defeated and it's like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to give up. Versus going, oh, that was actually just my system checking the old ways against the new ways. It wasn't saying I gave up on the new ways. I'm just checking the old ways and seeing if we need to make any course corrections or, we head in the right way. So, yeah, I mean, there's just so many variables and so many different ways to kind of look at this, but I think the key thing is just spending a little more time in the moment with that experience, because it's amazing what will come out of it if you allow yourself to be in it for a little bit. Assuming it's not, if you're an emotional, there are extreme cases where people can get lost in the emotion because the images and the pictures and the sounds that the mind is making are just horribly frightening. Don't stay in that. But if it's
that's more like somatic or mental kind of panic attack kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about here. But if you're feeling like kind of bad or kind of down, but sticking with hard emotions to the point where it's not detrimental and, as you said, doesn't downward spiral.
Right.
Sometimes if we stick with anything, because all emotions are not designed to last. No emotion can last, period. It's not a lot of things that are black and white in this world. That's one of them. All good feelings and all bad feelings cannot last. So if you stay with it, you can come out on the other side of it. And this is where like a mindfulness practice can be so incredibly useful.
All right.
I talk with this about clients a bit. It's not necessarily what I do or what we do, because it's we do more belief and identity transformation, but just putting this out
on
for
top
anyone
a little bit. It's kind of a little sprinkle on top to kind of keep you going throughout the day.
It's like lifting weights. I don't, some people want a personal trainer to watch them and tell them how to lift weights each time, but sometimes it's more like, all right, we'll teach you what to do and then go do it every day for the rest of your life and it'll work. A really solid mindfulness practice operates like that. I would recommend it to everyone. And mindfulness is different than meditation. So if you think they're the same, they are not. Meditation's great, but not necessarily what we're talking about right now, because sometimes people use meditation to resist their feelings and that gets problematic. Mindfulness is just coming fully present into the moment and being with those feelings, whatever they are, until they transmute a little bit. And you can notice the thoughts that you have while this is happening and write them down, because they're very likely either the beliefs or the parts of your identity that are coming up to be like to show themselves to be revised, or they're memories that are useful to kind of be like, at the highest level, all we're really doing here in everything we've talked about today is just reminding the mind and the body and the heart that whenever you feel bad or anxious or under threat for something that's not truly life threatening, we want to find some way at the highest level to remind everything in our system that that was then and this is right now.
Right.
That's the highest level, simple explanation of this.
Yeah.
It's like whatever feels threatening to us is not right now, right? Unless, of course.
Except it is.
Yeah.
Right.
But that's what I'm saying. It of course it feels that way,
Right.
which makes it real, but we want to kind of get some altitude on that and be like, whatever this was back then and not right now, even though I'm experiencing it right now, which makes it real right now, but that's not the truest explanation of what's going on here.
Yeah.
And that's why mindfulness can be really useful for that.
Yeah. I was talking to Regina last week. And she's got a new class that she's doing, and she was talking to one of the gals offline, not in the public class. And this gal had a pretty traumatic experience when she was younger. And so Regina asked her, it's like, well, how old are you today? And I'm going to say she was 44 or whatever. And this happened when she was 5. She goes, let that 5-year-old know how old you are. And this gal she said she just totally broke down. That little 5-year-old that had that traumatic experience had gotten kind of frozen in time and didn't realize the rest of the body had continued living on, and didn't even know that there was this 44-year-old version that had survived. And just letting that little 4-year or 5-year-old version of this gal know that she survived was like a ton of weight off of her shoulders. It totally reframed everything. For whatever reason, things get stuck. And this is why we say when if you try and apply logic to any of this, forget about it. It's not going to happen. You don't know how a 5-year-old mind is working, what type of fantasies it brings in, and how it compiles things. One of the things that we do know is that regardless of how old you are not that age. You are all of the ages combined, because all of your ages, because there is no time in the unconscious critter brain, all of those ages are happening all the time now. And it's everything you see, everything you hear, everything that you taste is all being compared against your life experiences to identify, is it safe? Do I like it? Is it, what's the outcome going to be? It is all being filtered through that.
Yeah. And when they do brain scans of people with PTSD and serious trauma, what they show up is when people get triggered, basically almost the entire mind goes dark, or the part of it generating that experience is lit up and everything else is offline. And we can see this has been proven scientifically. And so for this woman, when she gets triggered by this traumatic experience, again, the critter brain that does know time, it doesn't know that they're not 5 years old anymore. So it's operating as this thing almost killed us, so let's keep an eye out for it, and also maybe let's recreate some variant of it too, potentially. And when it gets triggered, the whole part of her adult mind just goes offline, and you're back in a 5-year-old encapsulated version of yourself. And we all do this to some degree in our own ways.
And sometimes you can see it in other people's faces. There's, when you become aware of it, it's easier to see. But you'll actually see people age digress, and it's crazy because when they do it, when you get an adult, an adult person, especially if they're in their 50s and 60s and they age regress to a 2-year-old, it's, it can be a little cringy to watch, but then it's also kind of like, oh, that's kind of cute. I can see the 2-year-old version of them crying right now. It's an interesting
there's like
world.
a horrifying sweetness to it when it becomes really clear. Because you can just see that 2-year-old or that 5-year-old or whatever showing up. It's like, it's it's been frozen in time. And if you're 50 years old, time's been frozen in your mind for so long. It's just so horrifying when you think about it.
Yeah.
And also, it's what your brain's supposed to do. So you can have reverence for it too, as painful as it is. It's a very, multifaceted, confusing experience sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe we can just take a breath and like pop up a bit, helicopter up and get like a higher 10,000 foot view, which is really useful, not when we're in pain in the moment necessarily, and not when we're striving to make change in our lives, but just having some reverence for the entire process and our humanity can be really useful too.
Yeah. It's a great way to have compassion for yourself and then also compassion for other people. Because when you kind of understand what they're going through, it's like, oh shit, okay, maybe it's not my place to judge that person for behaving or acting the way that they are. But maybe I can have a little compassion and understanding for where they're at. I don't like what they're doing right now. And I don't have to like what they're doing right now, but maybe I can have a little compassion and understanding for what they're going through right now. So
absolutely.
How much
empathy is a human superpower.
Yeah. We could use a little more.
You don't have to like it.
Yeah, don't even have to like it, folks.
And you don't have to be around them. And some people are truly difficult to be around, and you don't have to subject yourself to that. But you can honor and see and have empathy for their struggle and their patterning and the way their reality is put together. And that will help you. It's a win-win situation.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All righty, sir. Anything else you'd like to discuss? Did we miss anything?
I think this has been a fun one. Let's wrap up. I mean, I can give it a shot first. Let's wrap up with some stuff people can do, and then I think we can call it a show for the day. I mean,
sounds good.
My thoughts are, it's like, all right, well, great, Ryan and Will, what the hell do I do? Okay.
Breathe.
Yeah.
Breathe is
so breathing's good. Focus on getting clear about what you want is a really great starting place. As you said, that ferrets out the problems and the stuck trauma in our bodies and in our minds. So getting really clear about what you want, get specific about it, and also I'll add in, the kind of classic phrase, I forget where it's from, maybe it's the Tao Te Ching, where it's like the reed that bends doesn't break. So get incredibly specific, but also leave room in your system and in your heart and in your mind for better things to show up or for adjustments to be made if that what has to happen. But be as specific as you want about what you want in your life. This is your experience here on this planet. And that will bring these things up. And when choosing a positive thing that you want makes you feel unsafe, right? Yeah, breathe. Do some sort of somatic mindfulness thing. There's so many. It's like to choose the one you like best, but taking 10 deep breaths and like holding an object and like just kind of noticing your sensory experience of it is a really kind of useful catch-all way to do this in the moment, because you can always grab something or touch something and just notice your experience of touching it and holding it and
just make sure you
using
know who they
it.
are.
Don't do this with people.
Yeah.
I mean, sure. Innovate, let us know if you found a cool way to do that with consent, of course, but I'm thinking more like an inanimate object.
I was on the subway in New York and I started having a moment. So
reach out and touch your neighbor. Yeah. Funny.
Yeah.
So and then I would say test.
Kind of lean into that uncomfortable feeling, right?
Yeah.
Instead of running away from it. Yeah, instead of running away from it, which is, I think, atypical for most people, is like, oh, okay, I'm going to sit with this. May that be for a second longer than I normally do, for 5 seconds, for 30 seconds, or, whatever feels comfortable for you. Just see what comes out of it. It may not be anything. It took me a while because I'm always, you know, the whole going back to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, watching that, and then all of a sudden I just get really sad or kind of emotional. It dumbfounds me, because in the past I wouldn't even let my system get there. As soon as I would feel something come on, I would kick it off. And so I didn't have to deal with the experience, because I shortcutted it right at the beginning. So I'm still in the mode when these things kick in. I'm like, why is it this video is like I'm getting this reaction from this video? Doesn't make any sense to me. It's like, doesn't have to make sense, right? I'm just going to sit with this for a little bit. I'm going to breathe, and I'm just going to see where this goes. And, you know, if I got friends around, I'm like, okay, I'm going to shortchange this and I'll deal with it next time. But if I'm in a place where I feel comfortable, I'm going to go, okay, I'm going to sit with this. I'm going to check it out, see what's going on. And it was this whole thing around people caring that came up. And it was like, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to sit with this a little bit more. Not trying to figure it out, but just sit with it and see what comes. And so I got somewhere that's different than where I was last week. So
yeah, very cool.
You know, and these are all part of the little. These are all part of the little steps that we have to take, right? It's not, oh, you want to be rich, you have to win the lottery. No, you got to do all the little steps. You got to make a dollar more than you did the day before. If you made $1 more every day than the day before, you know, within a year you'd be rich.
Exactly. And when you're being with these emotions, if you have the time and the bandwidth, staying with them for as long as you can is useful. And if you don't have to try to sort them out or figure them out, but it can be useful if it feels right to say, what is this experience or this emotion trying to show me or trying to teach me? Because all emotions are our bodies communicating with us in some way. So this is being communicated to us for a reason. You know, there's a deep wisdom and intelligence to our bodies and to our systems that if we will listen, we can hear them. And it may not happen the first time, or it might. So you can also add in that question when it feels appropriate.
Right. I think I had an elementary school teacher that made it very clear to us that as little kids, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should listen twice as much as you talk.
Exactly. I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
That's true. So what else can they do?
I mean, I think that's kind of a great place to start, is just getting comfortable with those feelings. And if you wanted to go deeper, you know, obviously Will or myself would love to talk to you, because there are ways that you can learn, just like there are ways that you can learn to communicate with dogs, so that you can have a not a two-way conversation, but a relatable conversation, if you will, with your unconscious mind, so that you can start to understand a little bit better. It's kind of shortening the gap a little bit as far as knowledge goes, and kind of understanding. And then, okay, because ultimately it's about identifying, well, what is it that the mind learned at a younger age that it felt was so important that it needed to bookmark and say, we're going to pay attention to this.
Yep. And the beliefs and the identities that came online, because these beliefs just kind of work like lines of code in our mind. They run. So if we have beliefs that are generating painful experiences in our lives that are unconscious but totally limiting, those can be revised. We can go back to where they were learned, and you can relearn them. And then when that code is revised, it's just different forever. When it's different, it's just different. So it's no longer sending commands to have painful emotions or fight, flight, freeze experiences about things that aren't truly threatening to the mind or the body.
It doesn't get triggered. It's kind of like that imposter syndrome. When you start out doing something, typically you don't perceive yourself as an imposter. Oh shit, I started walking. I'm a human. I can't be a human. I'm just a baby. I'm just learning how to walk. How could I, but we get to certain points where we start to exceed what our belief is allowing us to believe. And now, oh, maybe I'm not really this good. Maybe I shouldn't be, putting myself out there, blah, blah, blah. That's that code that Will's talking about. You get rid of that code, the thought never comes up. What do you mean, imposter?
Yep.
I'm the best goddamn boxer I ever was. I float like a honeybee, or what did he floated like something and stung like a bee.
Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee.
There you go. Imposter, please.
Yeah.
I'll knock anyone out.
Yeah. And that's the big high level concept we've been talking about today. Our identity always has to stay coherent or else we're crazy. So when we've updated our identity to just be, when we just update our identity to be what we consciously want, and we can embody that at an identity and a belief level, it's just who we are now. It's coherent to be this rich, this good looking, this happy, this revered by people, whatever the thing is you want. This stuff is adjustable. It might take time. It might happen quickly. It just kind of depends on the person and what happened in their lives. But you can work to change your identity and your beliefs in the ways that you want from this top level conscious thinking mind. And you can work bottom up to reconcile the balance sheet of the threat and the pain and the unprocessed emotions that the body has stored. And those can be processed and let go, and just things can be better. Just knowing that this can be better is probably the most important place to start for people. And it might take some time, and that's why people say, well, that didn't work. It's like, no, it does work. It's like you go to the gym once, you say, well, that didn't work. Like, well, that's not how the gym works. This can be a process sometimes. But what's more important, for me personally, I was like, what could possibly be more important in your life than working this process? You have to live with yourself every second of every day for the rest of your life. Like, what could be more important than making it a better experience for yourself, internally and externally?
It's makes me think of the question, when's the best time to plant a tree? And I think it's like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever. When's the second best time to plant a tree? Right now. Right now.
Truer words have never been spoken. So that's how it works. And I got a little quick hack. If you're one of those people who's like a thrill seeker, and maybe you're starting to realize you kind of got this trauma thing going on, and you keep finding yourself in dangerous situations, some may be healthier than others. If you like to jump out of planes or parachute off of cliffs, maybe that's a healthier expression than walking down dark alleyways for fun, even though you have no idea why you're doing it, right? This stuff can show up in weird ways. But if you're one of those people who kind of notices that maybe your identity coherence is trauma's recreating the threats that it survived, one, work on that. It's like super important. But two, in the meantime, there's a little thing that can actually have a very profound effect. Learn to rechannel the thrill seeking in a positive way. So choose something that is deep inside you that you wanted to do, but feels scary or threatening. Like, write the book you've always wanted to write, start that business, put yourself out there in dating again to find the right partner, start speaking publicly, or join Toastmasters, start making videos on YouTube, like something that, like, whatever, start, making art that you're going to have to show to people, and that feels terrifying. Like, so you can actually rechannel this positive, like, you can get the hits that the system's seeking, since there's been a deadening of nerves and aliveness, that, you can start to feel alive again by feeling a threat of pursuing something that's really meaningful. And everyone has these, even if you're sitting there being like, I don't know what that is. Like, I don't want to do anything. I don't really care. That just means you don't have access to it yet. But there's some sort of creative expression that feels threatening that can be good to rechannel that if you're one of those people who is finding yourself like, keep doing all this risky behavior and it's really bad for me. You can rechannel that a bit as you retool your system in the process too.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a cool one. It actually it includes big level identity and belief stuff and like where your system's at right now, but rechannels it in a positive way.
Right.
Yeah. All right. So that's just a little hack for those traumatic thrill seekers out there. Write the book, make the speech, whatever it is.
Is knitting on the list? Take up knitting.
If knitting feels threatening and also deeply fulfilling to your soul, then yes, that meets the criteria.
But you gotta make sure you enter it into the county fair so everybody can see it.
Yeah, that's the thing. If making art is whatever, but if showing it feels terrifying, then that would be the part where your system gets the payoff that it seeks. So that's an important part of it. Yeah, it has to be a bit scary for some reason.
Very cool. Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, I think that's it then. I think
that'll be a day
until next time, next week, next Tuesday, 10:15 in the morning, Pacific time.
Until then, keep your identities coherent and keep your identities more and more what you want, so that can be coherent too.
There you go. Perfect. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Questions, comments, thumbs up, thumbs down, all that good stuff. Be sure to post in the comments below. Till next week, Will. Hope you have a great afternoon.
You too, Ryan. Thank